Hey everyone, today we're bringing back my History of Brother Voodoo videos to talk about his transition from the identity of Brother Voodoo to Doctor Voodoo and his time as Sorcerer Supreme. You can check out what we've covered so far on this character by clicking on the button in the top corner here. And make sure you subscribe and are getting notifications from us so you can get more videos on Jericho Drumm in the future. Sometime after Jericho's encounter with Gambit, Nick Fury, spy master of the World Security Agency known as S.H.I.E.L.D., formed a team of individuals with paranormal traits and made them into a new iteration of a group called the Howling Commandos. This team consisted of a wide variety of paranormal beings. First and foremost, Warwolf, a unique type of werewolf, Nina Price, also known as the Vampire by Night, Incantu, also called the Living Mummy, Frank, a clone of Frankenstein's monster, a zombie known only as John Doe, and Kenneth Hale, a human whose mind is trapped in the body of a gorilla, thus earning him the nickname Gorilla Man. Operating out of a base called Area 13, the Howling Commandos were initially under the command of Nick Fury's trusted agent, Dum Dum Dugan. However, shortly before Jericho became involved with the Howling Commandos, the team was put under the command of a new leader named Clay Quarterman, a high-ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. agent with a long history of working with the Hulk. With additional agents such as the actual Abominable Snowman and Sasquatch from folklore, along with Jericho's old associate Lilith the Vampire, and a sentient tree named Groot, various members of this team would be dispatched to any number of clandestine missions according to Fury's needs and orders, with the commandos largely focused on supernatural threats. As Quartermain was settling into his new role as leader of the team, reluctantly and not without conflict, Jericho Drumm appeared at Area 13 through a portal, severely injured. Recognized by Warwolf, Voodoo rambled to him about an overwhelming danger at hand. Though he was unable to verbalize it initially, Jericho had glimpsed an oncoming and deadly threat: the appearance of a wizard claiming to be the Merlin of Arthurian times, attacking Earth with an army of fey beings, intent on bringing a new era of magical power and domain over Earth. Jericho informed the commandos that Merlin, or at least this particular wizard calling himself by such a name, emerged from the Stonehenge monument and slaughtered all those working at another S.H.I.E.L.D. facility. Unable to determine much else from the attack, other than being able to confirm it was indeed magical in nature, Quartermain dispatched Nina and Lilith to investigate Stonehenge. When informed of this, Jericho was alarmed to learn S.H.I.E.L.D. took no further precautions against Merlin, and Drumm warned them that this would mean Merlin would be able to easily interrogate the vampires and learn everything about Area 13. Sure enough, Merlin did capture both women, leaving Nina tied up so that she would burn in the sunlight come morning, while taking Lilith into his protective custody out of respect for her being a daughter of Dracula. Merlin did learn about Area 13 from the vampires as Jericho suspected, and unleashed a full-scale assault on the facility. Jericho joined with the Howling Commandos, fighting at their side to subdue this army of invading mythological beings. Together, they managed to push the army back through a portal to Stonehenge, and proceeded to release a number of their own captive monsters on Merlin's army, including Groot. Though the commandos pursued Merlin into the UK, Jericho chose to stay behind. He talked to Quartermain's subordinate, a scientist named Bradley Beamer, and mentioned he was impressed by Clay's abilities and thought he made a promising leader for the commandos. He also advised Beamer that Merlin was clearly controlling an army of Fae by force, and if they broke his hold over these magical beings, the Howling Commandos could easily defeat Merlin. Jericho later joined a group of sorcerers and other mystics in part of the assault on this wizard and his forces. As S.H.I.E.L.D. moved in to strike, Lilith attempted to turn Merlin into a vampire, only for him to overpower her and brutally incinerate her, though Lilith cannot be permanently killed while Dracula is still alive. Jericho meanwhile met with the Howling Commandos in the field after he and the other sorcerers were able to disable Merlin's magical barriers around the headquarters, which the wizard had established in the city of Salisbury. S.H.I.E.L.D. then launched a large attack on the settlement, using a host of major assets and various troops available to them. Thanks to an alliance they made with an old enemy of the Fantastic Four called the Mole Man, Quatermain was able to seize the entire city of Salisbury, full of civilians, allowing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s forces to focus entirely on Merlin and his monsters without worrying about civilian casualties. This attack proved successful overall, but though Merlin was defeated, the wizard survived and ultimately escaped the encounter. Not long after this, the first superhero civil war began. Though Jericho Drumm managed to largely stay out of the main conflict, he did not stay neutral during the war itself. He personally disagreed with many of the principles behind the cause of the superhero civil war, namely the Superhero Registration Act, but nonetheless agreed to register with S.H.I.E.L.D. as an already active agent through the Howling Commandos, declining an offer from Black Panther for asylum, and proving vital in locating those who refused to register across America. Jericho even made a bold offer to his S.H.I.E.L.D. superiors. If need be, he would help against the Sorcerer Supreme, who was rumored to be helping a group of fugitive Avengers. With few others willing to confront such a powerful mystic, the government was quick to take Jericho up on this offer. Shortly after the war officially ended, Doctor Strange was caught working directly with the fugitives, and had been secretly housing them for some time in his Sanctum Sanctorum. Strange was able to disguise the presence of these fugitives from government officials and their superhero allies, at which point Jericho Drumm was called in. Among the fugitives, Jericho was recognized by his old allies, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Luke Cage. Drumm performed a ritual designed to expose these heroes, though Steven was able to shield the group from that with a counterspell. As such, Jericho was unable to confirm the presence of the fugitive Avengers to the then new head of S.H.I.E.L.D., Iron Man. Brother Voodoo did take this opportunity to point out to Tony and the others that they were being hypocrites, openly questioning why the superheroes were so busy with each other instead of focusing on crime fighting like they were supposed to. But his concerns were brushed off by Stark and the others as a mere distraction. With work at the side of such big-name superheroes quickly proving a crushing disappointment, Jericho quickly distanced himself from S.H.I.E.L.D. and the United States government, returning home to New Orleans. There he met up with his old colleague Blade, and growing closer with the vampire hybrid, agreed to help him take out a gang of nearby vampires. While the city was still reeling from the widespread devastation of Hurricane Katrina, it had attracted a number of undead looking to take advantage of the chaos. Fortunately, the disaster also caught the attention of a number of other superheroes, including Luke Cage and Black Panther, who ran into Jericho and Blade out in the field. The four worked together to battle a number of vampires, though Jericho quickly fell into a trance at the start of the fight. Reaching out into the spiritual plane, Drumm discovered the identity of the two leading the attacking vampire clan, Victor and Beatrice Montague, two people who willingly became vampires centuries ago. Though the vampires tried to attack Jericho in the spirit realm, he easily overpowered them, working in conjunction with his brother's spirit, Daniel Drumm, to overpower the Montagues. Returning to the physical world, Voodoo announced to his allies he had discovered the location of Victor in the real world. Though the vampires nearly overwhelmed the four superheroes, T'Challa was able to call upon his elite guard, who brought him a set of holy armor and a special artifact called the Ebony Blade. These powerful weapons forced the vampires to flee, giving the heroes a chance to regroup. Though Blade was reluctant to work with the others, they agreed to coordinate their efforts for the sake of New Orleans, as the Montagues were intent on converting the entire city into an army of vampires under their control. Pairing up with Luke Cage, Jericho and Luke tracked down Victor's coffin, which they went to destroy so that Victor could be permanently killed. Before the two could do so, they were attacked by a massive winged vampire. Luke was forced to square off against the vampire alone, while Jericho once again fell into a trance. After Cage was brutally pummeled by the powerful undead creature for some time, the vampire suddenly exploded, the result of a spell successfully cast by Jericho. The two men watched as a light flew across the sky. It was another superhero, Monica Rambeau, arriving in New Orleans, and with powers based on solar energies, She easily wiped out the rest of the vampires. With the day saved, Jericho reunited with Black Panther, his Dora Milaje, and Luke Cage, while Blade left for a new mission out in Washington, D.C. Showing off his new car, a 1959 Cadillac Eldorado, Brother Voodoo took his friends for a drive through the recovering city before they all eventually parted ways. Following his encounter with the Montagues, Brother Voodoo was contacted by the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange. In spite of their recent differences over the Civil War, Jericho agreed to help Stephen with a task the Sorcerer had set about completing to restore balance to the universe, as things had been thrown into disarray by a mercenary named Deadpool. To restore order, they would have to reunite the body of a man named T-Ray with his immortal soul. Jericho used his magics to send Deadpool to a spiritual realm, and after a prolonged conflict with T-Ray on this alternate plane, the strange mercenary was able to reunite T-Ray with his soul. Jericho and Stephen talked after the men returned from the spiritual realm, and Stephen reassured his friend that helping Deadpool was for the best, even if the mercenary and his behavior were questionable. Jericho asked why involve Wade Wilson in these events at all, as it was well within the powers of the Sorcerer Supreme to set things right himself. But then he realized that Strange saw a potential in Deadpool and wanted to give the mouthy mercenary a chance to redeem himself. Drumm thus left both Deadpool and T-Ray with encouraging words and told them they could be great men if they worked together, while also revealing that they would be sharing a soul with one another as a result of their adventure in the spiritual plane. It was around this time that Earth suffered a cataclysmic infiltration by a group of shape-shifting aliens called Skrulls. Though only a fraction of the larger Skrull race, this group managed to impersonate many superheroes and key figures on Earth, including Brother Voodoo. A Skrull disguised as Jericho was sent to the advanced nation of Wakanda as a vanguard for the attack on the powerful country, a key part of the Skrull's plan for a larger direct invasion that was imminent. Using Jericho's status as a trusted member of Wakanda's forces, the Skrull was able to successfully enter the country under the auspices of healing two individuals who had recently been through a traumatic ordeal: Princess Shuri, sister to the Black Panther, and her companion Jamal. The Skrull disguised as Jericho quickly discovered that a cannibalistic spirit had come to possess Jamal. Not wanting to raise suspicions among Wakandan officials, the Skrull Brother Voodoo injected the cannibal with a lethal substance in an attempt to cover everything up and make it look like Jamal died from complications due to his earlier injuries. The cannibalistic spirit was able to survive this assault, however, and quickly realizing the nature of his attacker, pulled the alien spirit into the dying body of Jamal, in an attempt to force both of them to escape into the Skrull body so that they could survive. Rather than risk this cannibal possessing his body, the Skrulls sacrificially fought back, and Jamal died with the minds of both malevolent beings in his head, killing all three in the process. The nature of Jericho's impostor was immediately discovered by Wakanda forces following this, yet it was too late for the nation of Wakanda to prevent a full-scale ground assault of Skrull forces shortly after this incident. This led to a prolonged battle, but none of this involved the real Brother Voodoo, as he was, as far as what is documented, completely uninvolved in this invasion. Shortly after the events of the Skrull attack, the real Jericho Drumm was contacted by those he knew in S.H.I.E.L.D. on behalf of three superheroes, Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight, and the Sentry, who needed help dealing with the Hulk. The troubled superhero had recently gone on a rampage in Las Vegas around this time, also transforming into a deadly monster called the Wendigo, along with an army of civilians, leading to widespread chaos in the city. Carol Danvers, also known as Ms. Marvel at the time, vouched for Jericho Drumm to her peers, though mentioned that S.H.I.E.L.D. only contacted him as they still weren't on good terms with Doctor Strange. Arriving in Vegas, Jericho quickly stabbed one of the Avengers, his old friend Moon Knight, and performed a spell to knock back the rampaging Wendigo Hulk and force his transformation back to Bruce Banner, while the other Wendigos were also turned back into humans. Without a word to the heroes, Brother Voodoo left, thoroughly impressing Mark Spector. Incidents such as this and others since working with S.H.I.E.L.D. demonstrated by this point that Jericho Drumm was considered a major player in the world of both mysticism and the superhero community. Brother Voodoo's powers and their scope, along with his fame and reputation, increased to levels he had not achieved or perhaps even imagined he could achieve before. When a powerful angel named Zadkiel waged war on heaven, Brother Voodoo was among dozens who could sense the being destroying the gates to the celestial paradise during the peak of the angel's strength and assault on reality. Fortunately, Jericho's old friend Danny Rand worked with other Ghost Riders, including Johnny Blaze, to banish the angel to hell, without Jericho's involvement. Still, Drumm's powers should not be underestimated by this point, and others had also taken notice. Additionally, like many superheroes that originally complied with the Superhuman Registration Act, Jericho had become disillusioned with Tony Stark, S.H.I.E.L.D., and the American government, especially with how they were dealing with superheroes and crime fighting by this time. And Drumm had ample reason to feel this way. Tony Stark did such a miserable job with the Skrull invasion he was ousted from power, and replaced by a longtime enemy of Spider-Man, a man named Norman Osborn. Working for somebody like Osborn, who immediately set about to transform S.H.I.E.L.D. into a more fascist organization called Hammer, proved extremely unattractive to Brother Voodoo. Instead, he returned to New Orleans and largely kept to himself. That all changed after Doctor Strange gave up the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme for a number of reasons. He did this after a series of what he came to believe were major personal failures as the leading magical guardian of Earth. First, Stephen was unable to prevent the mental breakdown of the Scarlet Witch at the hands of Doctor Doom, which badly affected both the Avengers and entire mutant population. The second was when Strange and a group of other powerful figures in the superhero community exiled Hulk off-planet for a time. Doctor Strange was very publicly confronted for his role in this exile by the Hulk when he returned to Earth, and was struggling to reconcile with what he viewed as a betrayal of his friend, Bruce Banner. The final failure was a complete personal breakdown of Doctor Strange after he was forced to use dark magics in order to protect the group of fugitive Avengers from a villain named the Hood and an army of supervillains. So Stephen gave up the mantle of the Sorcerer Supreme, and seizing on this opportunity, the Hood, now possessed by a demon, attempted to steal a powerful artifact called the Eye of Agamotto from Strange. This item would be needed to find the next Sorcerer Supreme, provoking the fugitive Avengers to seek out the person who would become the next Sorcerer Supreme at once. Using the eye, Stephen led the team to New Orleans, and they were quick to deduce it was likely Jericho the team was seeking out. On arriving to this city in a stolen Quinjet, the eye then showed the Avengers all the possible candidates who might become the new Sorcerer Supreme, with Jericho Drumm among them, but far from the only one, before the artifact disappeared in front of a very confused team. They were then attacked by Madame Mask, a key ally to the Hood, while elsewhere in the city, Damon Hellstrom was assaulted by the Hood in an attempt to eliminate one of the Sorcerer Supreme candidates. In the ensuing chaos, the Hood transformed into a powerful demonic form and began to rampage through the streets of New Orleans. Meanwhile, the Sorcerer Supreme before Stephen, known as the Ancient One, contacted Jericho and Daniel through the Eye of Agamotto, and told both of them of the situation. The Ancient One said that the Eye of Agamotto considered over 30 candidates with magical powers, and it was Jericho who was not only most deserving, but most ready to take on the mantle at this time. Though Drumm was unsure about accepting this new role, he was encouraged by his brother's spirit, and Daniel promised to always be there for his brother, and thus, in the streets of New Orleans, the new Sorcerer Supreme appeared, ready to take on this new demonic threat. Working side by side with the Avengers, Jericho took on the demon with confidence and a deft skill. He, Strange, and Hellstrom were able to coordinate their efforts and trap the demon, and Stephen quickly came to recognize the one possessing the Hood was none other than Dormmamu, one of the worst enemies Stephen's ever faced. Realizing the danger was far greater than Strange initially anticipated, Stephen gave pause, afraid to be facing such a powerful foe in this state. Yet in a show of his new powers and abilities, coupled with his, by this point, tremendous experience, Jericho Drumm was able to perform an exorcism spell that banished Dormmamu from Earth and returned the Hood to his normal human form. As things calmed down, Stephen looked over the new Sorcerer Supreme and stated he was glad the Eye chose someone like Jericho to take his place, and offered to train his friend. However, Damon warned Jericho that for someone like Dormmamu to be able to break into Earth through a host as weak as the Hood meant that something terrible was happening in the mystic world. As the new Sorcerer Supreme, Jericho Drumm already had his work cut out for him. As the new Sorcerer Supreme, Jericho Drumm decided to change his superhero name to Doctor Voodoo, better reflecting his existing qualifications as a psychologist and new prominence in the world of mysticism. Now more mobile and active in the superhero community, he returned to New York City not long afterward and reached out to Monica Rambeau, a superhero he encountered earlier when helping New Orleans recover from Hurricane Katrina, them having worked together to oust the vampires that were plaguing the city. Jericho was interested in starting a relationship with the woman, but she had been avoiding him after the two only had a brief fling. Monica was interested in the man, but was plagued with feelings of insecurity and anxiety with regards to starting a relationship. Eventually, Jericho persuaded Monica to go out with him on a date in New York after sending zombies to deliver the woman flowers. They went on a date to the Voodoo Lounge in Harlem, where Drumm flirted with her heavily, but this largely left Monica annoyed, at least at first. With a strong level of charm and confidence, Jericho was able to not only impress her, but also ask her for help on a case he was working on as Sorcerer Supreme. He had tracked down an occult artifact that had made its way from New Orleans to New York City, the legendary monkey's paw. A man was selling the wish-granting paw in the city, but he refused to deal with Jericho after Drumm had killed his father, the infamous Baron Samedi, back when Jericho was in his early days operating as Brother Voodoo. Samedi's son took up his father's name and became the new Baron. So, after hooking up following their date, Rambeau agreed to go after the monkey's paw on Drumm's behalf. At the appointed time later, the woman went to the monkey paw auction while in contact with Jericho over a discreet headset. The paw was being sold at the North American Occult and Paranormal Society's annual benefit auction, a lavish event attended by many powerful, well-connected individuals. After an intense bidding war, Monica won the paw for $250,000. Not long after this, Monica and her friends, Felicia Hardy and Angelica Jones, approached Jericho with concern that their other friend, Patsy Walker, was trapped in a hell dimension by her ex-boyfriend, Damon Hellstrom. Jericho seemed intimidated by Hellstrom after their last encounter and preferred to avoid getting involved in the matter because of it. So instead, Monica used the monkey's paw to teleport herself and the other woman to hell. This deeply worried Jericho, as no wish granted by the paw ever quite works out the way the user intends. Nevertheless, the women were able to successfully rescue Patsy and Damon, returning them all to Earth after Walker worked out a deal with the man concerning the next edition of her tell-all autobiography, which featured Damon heavily. Everyone settled in back home, but this seemed to be what put a permanent end to any relationship between the two. Agreeing to remain friends, they ultimately moved on from one another, and largely went in different directions in their lives from here on out. Besides, Jericho was largely preoccupied with his new role as Sorcerer Supreme. In response to the being's earlier incursion, Jericho stormed Dormmamu's realm and confronted the powerful being in person, declaring the demonic entity would not be allowed to return to Earth. Though the villain scoffed at this declaration, Jericho revealed his Staff of Legba, a powerful artifact only one with the power of both the Sorcerer Supreme and the Expert of Ahungan could wield. Declaring himself unlike Doctor Strange, the Ancient One, or any other Sorcerer Supreme that came before him, Jericho destroyed a series of protective orbs around Dormmamu's lair, and summoned a barrier of mystical crows that would watch over the demon, forcing the entity to be imprisoned in his own realm, at least for a time. Though Jericho showed confidence in the face of this mighty threat, the experience was exhausting, and he felt pressure to take such bold action in an effort to prove himself as Sorcerer Supreme early on. In reality, the encounter deeply weakened him and nearly killed the man. Still, he and his brother's spirit Daniel were both confident that this would serve as a permanent prison for Dormmamu, though Stephen Strange, who stuck around as an advisor to Jericho, remains skeptical, pointing out Dormmamu has returned many times before. Though the mission was successful, the Eye of Agamotto warned Jericho that another powerful threat against Earth was still looming, but was unable to identify the exact nature of the threat. Stephen was more worried at the time about Jericho, though, who was pushing himself greatly in this new role and already reaching a breaking point. In spite of the demanding role of being the new Sorcerer Supreme, Jericho insisted on continuing his medical work at a New Orleans clinic. With so much going on, Doctor Voodoo started behaving recklessly around this time, openly stating he would push himself to the brink of death, and using dangerous magics in an attempt to predict the future, leaving Stephen deeply concerned about the state of his successor. Strange commented that he would never do these things, but Jericho also pointed out that this might be why the Eye of Agamotto chose Drumm as a replacement to begin with. Thoroughly humbled by recent events, Strange admitted that, at this point, he could only really learn from Jericho, not the other way around. With this, Stephen left, despondent about what the future might hold, and still lacking faith in the new Sorcerer Supreme. Adding to the stresses that were piling up on Jericho at this time, his free clinic was delayed in getting its government funding and was facing a near inevitable shutdown. It was at this clinic that Jericho was attacked by a sinister creature called the She-Devil, who took advantage of Jericho's journey to Dormmamu's dark dimensions and had been slaughtering children in New Orleans while he was gone. Their battle was interrupted by the arrival of Doctor Doom, something that both Jericho and Daniel had been preparing for, as Stephen warned them that Doom would test the mettle of the new Sorcerer Supreme at some point, with the villain likely viewing that only he deserved to wield artifacts like the Eye of Agamotto. Daniel bought his brother time by attacking the supervillain head-on, while She-Devil quietly slipped away. To protect the people at the clinic, Jericho used the distraction to prepare a teleportation spell and took he and Doom away while Daniel's spirit was seemingly destroyed by Victor. Doom, however, had been preparing for his attack on the new Sorcerer Supreme as well, and redirected the teleportation spell to one of Jupiter's moons, where Victor had left a number of magic-consuming slugs to decimate Jericho's powers and abilities. With Doctor Voodoo now exposed, Dr. Doom demanded that Drumm hand over the Eye of Agamotto, along with all other Sorcerer Supreme artifacts, even claiming that the eye was corrupted and tricked into picking Jericho to begin with. Drumm rejected Victor's claims and refused his demands. Instead, the two battled in a fight that traversed multiple dimensions and mystical realms. With Jericho weakened, Doom was able to come out on top in this fight and seize the Eye of Agamotto for himself. However, when it showed the man a vision of the future, Victor immediately dropped the artifact and returned it to Jericho, horrified at what was shown to him. He sincerely wished Jericho Drumm luck, but stated that nothing could save Doctor Voodoo from what was to come, which alarmed Jericho deeply. The Sorcerer Supreme was left stranded in an unknown dimension, unlike any he had ever encountered before, and was forced to flee from a group of strange frog monsters. He was confronted by images of his parents, and the apparent spirit of their killer, but quickly assessed this was some kind of entity playing a trick on him, and fled back to Earth. However, the entity inhabiting this realm was quietly observing all of this, and the mysterious being set his sights on Earth. Back home, Jericho reunited with Daniel, who explained that his spirit was sent to the realm of the dead by Doctor Doom. There, Daniel Drumm met with Death herself, who warned him, just as every other mystical portent out there at the time, that something terrible was coming. Daniel also explained that since his fight with Doctor Doom, many weeks had passed on Earth, during which time a number of the frog creatures Jericho had encountered earlier had attacked New Orleans, with the city being sealed off from the rest of the world. The Drumm brothers leapt into action, intent on releasing a number of then-dormant Loa to combat this new magical threat. On the way, they encountered Daemon Hellstrom, who warned the Sorcerer Supreme that this was the work of Satan, Hellstrom's father. However, Jericho quickly deduces this is a lie, and instead, Daemon reveals he is possessed by his new master, a sinister being Jericho had already faced once before, and it nearly cost the man his life. Nightmare, had finally found a way to Earth in his full physical form. Now free, Nightmare taunted Doctor Voodoo, claiming he had been manipulating Jericho for years through the man's dreams, all leading to this moment. In response, Drumm summoned a number of spirits, attacking the powerful villain with the lost souls of Shumagora, only for Nightmare to take control of these beings and overwhelm Jericho with a deadly assault spearheaded by Damon Hellstrom. Quickly outmatched, Drumm fled, and knew he would need help to deal with this menace. Meanwhile, in Latveria, Victor Von Doom erected something called a reality shield around his home nation. The barrier was designed to keep Nightmare and his extra-reality forces at bay, while he formulated a more permanent solution to this invasion. Drumm managed to steal away Nightmare from his sanctum, at least for a moment, giving him time to stow away the artifacts of the Sorcerer Supreme. Damon, however, managed to break through these magical barriers and nearly killed Jericho. But luckily, Daniel Drumm appeared and possessed Damon, explaining he had managed to hide away most of the magics in the sanctum, provoking Nightmare's fury. The brothers, with Hellstrom's body, now began to flee, intent on finding the Avengers, only to be attacked by the Ghost Riders Danny Ketch and Johnny Blaze, who had also fallen under the Nightmare's thrall. These spirits, both possessing deadly levels of celestial power, meant that the Drumm brothers could only briefly knock the Riders back before absconding to New York City, lucky to have survived the encounter at all. There they found Nightmare's influence had already spread through the entire city, and he had found a new ally eager to take his revenge on Doctor Voodoo. The Hood returned to form and quickly blasting Jericho with 2 supernatural bullets. His body was only saved by Daniel, but it was too late for his mind. The Sorcerer Supreme had become possessed by Nightmare. Daniel Drumm was forced to flee as an army of supernaturally empowered superheroes pursued him, all under Nightmare's control. Attacked by his own brother, Daniel, still in the body of Damon, nearly got Hellstrom killed by the corrupted Sorcerer Supreme, forcing Drumm to return to his brother's body. This managed to force Jericho free of Nightmare's control with the aid of the Eye of Agamotto. Now reunited, the Drumm brothers turned their attention to the Nightmare at hand. Together, they sought the aid of the various Loath, only to find them all mysteriously gone. Met by a revered deity known as Imala, bringer of goodness, she warned them that all they accomplished by contacting her was opening the possibility of Nightmare corrupting the Loa, just as he had done to the beings on Earth, prompting the deities to all go into hiding. Jericho knew this corruption would be a possibility, but he had no choice, and insisted they need to work together to stop this menace. Imala thus told them of a means to defeat Nightmare. By bringing him physically to the realm of the Loa, called the Bondier, it will drain the villain of his malevolent energies. However, to do this, Daniel realized they would need the device Dr. Doom used to send the spirit to Hell earlier. With little time remaining, Dr. Voodoo joined with Doom in Latveria to hold off Nightmare and his army of magical superheroes. This led to a brutal and devastatingly long battle where many innocents were killed, with both Jericho and Victor being forced to end just about every magical superhero on the planet. These possessed heroes knew nothing of the actual situation, only seeing nightmares concocted by their master right up to the very end. Things went on like this for days, until nearly every mage on Earth was killed, along with other powerful beings like Man-Thing and Dracula. Jericho managed to suffer through all of this until he felt the full wrath of Johnny Blaze's penance stare, one of the Ghost Rider's more powerful abilities that Drumm is very lucky to have survived, only saved thanks to the might of Dr. Doom. Increasingly desperate, Doom handed over the Book of Vishanti to the Sorcerer Supreme, willing at this point to do just about anything to help against the relative strength of Nightmare. Through this, Jericho learned the Ghost Rider spheres were not possessed, only their human hosts. The group realized Daniel Drumm could free the Ghost Riders and use that power, so Victor agreed to hand over the only weapon that so far had proven effective against Nightmare, an advanced piece of technology called the Actuality Shield, which he had been using to force a certain sense of reality over Latveria. This device would prevent Nightmare from taking over Daniel's mind, but it would also destroy his entirely spiritual body. Still, Daniel agreed to possess Johnny Blaze and moved in for one last-ditch effort against Nightmare. Jericho was sad at the thought of losing his brother, but Daniel reassured him that this act of heroism would make their parents happy. Daniel rushed Nightmare and detonated the shield around them, turning Nightmare, at least temporarily, into a mortal being who could feel pain for the first time. With this powerful villain stunned, Doom and Jericho were able to grab the violent entity and throw him into the portal, which Victor used to convert Nightmare into pure energy and absorb the being. Doom then revealed this was all part of his master plan. He deliberately stranded Jericho in Nightmare's realm in an effort to lure the entity to Earth. Now, banking on near unlimited power, he turned on the Sorcerer Supreme and once again demanded the Eye of Agamotto. Drumm, in turn, simply stood his ground against Doom and stated he was aware of all of this. Daniel then took possession of Dr. Doom, and Jericho explained the Book of Vishanti had actually cast a spell of trust on Doom to ensure his cooperation up until this point. The brothers worked together to orchestrate everything and ensure Daniel would pretend to die so that he could eventually possess Doom. Jericho explained to his brother that he was able to manipulate Victor with one simple variable villains so often overlook. The love the Drumm brothers shared for each other was something Doom could not adequately account for. The two brothers trusted each other so implicitly that Victor never imagined Daniel would risk his own life like that. They sent Nightmare off to the Bondier in the hopes that the Loa might use the villain's energies in a more productive way. On his way out of Earth, however, Nightmare warned them that an even greater threat was on the way, having been working through the Sorcerer Supreme in secret the entire time. As the brothers sealed away the portal, Doom managed to expel Daniel from Jericho's body and attacked, outraged at Jericho's audacity. Dr. Voodoo stopped Victor's assault with a swift punch to the face, and told Victor to leave, having clearly lost this fight. Doom assented to this demand, but promised he would eventually return. Though Daniel was happy over this victory, Jericho remained worried, feeling as though the boundaries around this world's reality were weaker than ever. However, the mood was far from all doom and gloom. The Drumm brothers not only saved the world, but also undid Nightmare's widespread destruction and chaos in the process. This brought back all the people that were lost, and they even managed to maintain control over the Sorcerer Supreme artifacts. As the brothers settled back in New Orleans, they were unaware of a Loa named Ogun the Slayer, who in the Bondier managed to seize the power of Nightmare for himself. This being seemed intent on invading Earth next, but to date he never has. It is believed that his feelings of rage and thirst for conquest may have subsided over time, as Ogun was not always a force of destruction. In fact, in the past, he had worked to benefit mankind. It is also possible that the ancient mystics who had sealed him away long ago still prevent his return to this very day. As though their magics were weakened by Nightmare, Jericho reinforced them and they never were fully broken. In either case, the world was far too busy to notice something like that happening in another realm, and Doctor Voodoo with it. While Jericho was still adapting to his new role, the larger world of superheroes was experiencing a period of unprecedented turmoil. A series of catastrophic events started by the recent Skrull invasion had put Norman Osborn in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. Norman was a longtime enemy of a superhero Jericho had worked with years ago named Spider-Man, and as the new head of S.H.I.E.L.D., he was growing increasingly unstable, making more and more superheroes around Earth fugitives of the law, and eventually starting an all-out war effort against the realm of Asgard. Following in the tradition of Stephen Strange, Jericho largely took a back seat to major events like this, and they were generally viewed as more of a matter of superhero politics than a threat to the mystic order and balance around Earth. Asgard, though it represented a significant trove of extremely powerful items with magical properties and other such phenomena of interest, did not really change anything for Jericho Drumm, as many other heroes were involved in this conflict and thus able to handle whatever Norman had planned. It seems around this time Drumm only involved himself when the need for a Sorcerer Supreme was obvious, such as when, as a result of a weakened Nightmare, an extremely powerful entity named the Chaos King attacked Earth, quite possibly representing the threat Nightmare was warning about earlier. Jericho joined with other superheroes in battling this being and protecting the world, though ultimately it was others like Hercules and Thor that took the lead in neutralizing this sinister being. This may seem careless given the perilous nature of the powers involved, but ordinary supervillains might seem like a mild threat when the fabric of reality was at stake during this period, and it happened quite a bit during Drumm's time as Sorcerer Supreme due to that weakened sense of reality he was facing. As such, Jericho instead concerned himself with something that threatened all of existence, a mercenary who he had already had a memorable encounter with named Deadpool. Wade Wilson had encountered a number of alternate versions of himself from across the multiverse, while he was also being flung through time, leading to a net effect where the natural order of the universe was in danger. Ever a busy man, Jericho was able to quickly restore things to normal and tasked the loudmouth mercenary with returning a zombified Deadpool to its home universe. He left, once again mildly perplexed by the mercenary's behavior, but also confident Steven was right about there being a good person within Deadpool deep down. Wilson did indeed succeed at returning the zombie, and even while in this alternate universe defeated a zombie version of Jericho Drumm that inhabited this apocalyptic realm. This zombie version of Jericho Drumm was intent to spread the zombie plague into the multiverse, so his defeat by Wade Wilson was particularly significant.
As Jericho resumed his duties as the Sorcerer Supreme, Victor Von Doom, as he promised earlier, returned, and began making major plays as a conqueror of Earth. He invaded Wakanda and made unprecedented inroads in securing the country and its vast resources, largely succeeding at his main goal of obtaining the extremely powerful metal known as vibranium for himself. Initially, Black Panther, then married to Storm, relied on their allies to aid against this war, leading to a prolonged and bloody conflict. This war dragged on for some time, involving a great deal of corporate espionage and subterfuge, along with wide-scale violence. Doom, having declared himself King of Wakanda, was eventually pushed into creating a helmet that would allow him control over all vibranium on the planet. This gave him enormous powers and almost immediately caught the attention of many, Jericho included. The Sorcerer Supreme was unable to help Black Panther directly, instead being one of a number of superheroes forced to defend the rest of Earth as Doom's new powers spilled into every corner of the planet. The villain had formed Panthers made out of vibranium, and they attacked armed forces all across the world. And Jericho was left preoccupied by this in the Americas. Luckily, Black Panther was able to bring an end to Doom's reign over Wakanda by rendering all processed vibranium on Earth inert. It is interesting to note that Jericho is also one of the heroes who seem to decline in helping rebuild Wakanda following this war. He was not alone in this, as others like Tony Stark and Stephen Strange were notably absent. But it can just as readily be noted that some, like Thor, Spider-Man, Captain America, Magneto, and every single member of the Fantastic Four, all very deliberately took the time to help the nation when it was in need. Doctor Voodoo's absence is hardly uncharacteristic of Jericho Drumm's attitude and behavior around this time either. Often working alone and considering his responsibilities as Earth's master of mysticism above all other concerns, Jericho, not unlike Stephen Strange before him, remained largely isolated from the rest of the superhero community, and their efforts to repel threats such as Norman Osborn or Doctor Doom were considered beyond his scope. Outside of events like the entire planet being under attack, Jericho Drumm was only ever rarely seen. He did make a brief appearance at the Avengers annual picnic, but otherwise rarely worked with any of the Avengers directly during this time, in spite of his status as Sorcerer Supreme. This behavior proved dangerous. When he was attacked by Damon Hellstrom and Stephen Strange, both possessed by an unknown entity, Jericho and the spirit of his brother were both quickly overwhelmed. As a result of this deadly attack, Daniel appeared to have been destroyed. In the ensuing chaos, Jericho resorted to pulling the off-guard Avengers into the fray, and they were able to free both Stephen and Damon. However, this possessive force simply moved into the Iron Fist, taking over the living weapon and using him to vanish from this plane of existence with the Eye of Agamotto, right in front of the superheroes. With the eye suddenly gone, a dimensional rift opened over the Earth and began spawning strange demons all around the team. Damon viewed these events as the new Sorcerer Supreme failing in his most basic duties, and Drumm was left thoroughly humbled into thinking his recent tactics were inadequate to fit this new role. He agreed to work with Steven and Damon to save this planet and make up for his recent mistakes. In spite of his tremendous experience, Doctor Strange did not recognize these attacking beings, and so he asked Damon and Jericho to join him in investigating the matter further while the Avengers held off the demonic horde. No ordinary being, demonic or otherwise, should be strong enough to possess both Damon and Steven at the same time, or outright destroy Daniel Drumm. The three had absolutely no idea what was happening, and few leads as to how to stop what was coming without the Eye of Agamotto. Steven was at a loss as the attacker was behaving unlike any villain they had ever faced before. The group resorted to simply watching the attack unfold on Earth in the hope that clues would show up. Unfortunately, things were not going well, as the Avengers were starting to get desperate. When Carol Danvers tried to fly through the dimensional rift, Steven was forced to use astral projection to forcibly stop her, explaining that the rift would destroy her body completely. Jericho and Damon watched as a light burst forth from the rift, at which point the unusual demons disappeared, the rift vanished along with it, and a single human fell from the sky. They were surprised to find Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, transformed and returned, holding on to the Eye of Agamotto, and furious at Doctor Strange. Danny demanded to know who the Eye of Agamotto really belonged to. Claiming to have spoken to the Ancient One, Doctor Strange's old master and the original Sorcerer Supreme, he accused Steven of having lied all this time, being little more than a petty thief. Meanwhile, the spirit of Daniel Drumm found himself in a strange and mysterious realm. He called out to Jericho, assuming he had finally gone to the afterlife for good, but did manage to send a brief message to his brother. Jericho was left confused by these events, and isolated himself in the sanctum in an attempt to investigate matters further, growing frustrated at his own ignorance. For his part, Steven denied any wrongdoing and suggested Iron Fist may have been lied to by something only appearing as the Ancient One. He insisted the Eye of Agamotto was given to him willingly by his mentor, and he turned it over to Jericho, all with everyone's full consent in the matter. It was then that a being appeared, claiming to be a force of Agamotto himself and from the light dimension. This entity threatened them with full-scale war and demanded they return the eye, and when Doctor Strange refused, it possessed the Avengers and attacked. Doctor Voodoo appeared and instantly broke this entity's hold on the heroes, dispelling the being, at least for a time. He announced to the others that he's finally figured out what to do, and called out to Agamotto to challenge this being directly. Agamotto, one of an order of powerful magical deities called the Vishanti, was said to be the first among the Sorcerer Supreme, agreeing to fight one man to the death over possession of the eye. The Avengers and Mystics worked together to empower Wolverine and send him into the light dimension, where Logan attacked Agamotto and they began a fierce battle of mystic arts. This went on for some time until they were found by Daniel, who, upon intervening, accidentally broke the rules of the duel. Agamotto began to destroy both Daniel Drumm and Logan as a result, so Jericho stepped in and traveled to the light dimension himself. There, Jericho confronted Agamotto with the truth, that he was only seizing the eye to further secure the sorcerer's power after he was cast out from the Vishanti for being too power-hungry. At these words, Agamotto attacked, and Jericho bravely fought against the very first Sorcerer Supreme. He managed to cast a powerful spell of banishment, sending Agamotto out of the light dimension for all time and bringing this being's existence to a firm end. But the powerful spell proved deadly. Daniel could only watch, helpless, as his brother was destroyed along with Agamotto. Drumm found nothing of his brother Jericho and watched as the Eye of Agamotto faded from existence completely. With both the Sorcerer Supreme and the Eye of Agamotto lost in but one day, Earth was left more vulnerable than ever. The others, like Iron Fist, took comfort in the world once again being saved. But Daniel Drumm was left furious. Possessing Luke Cage, he accused Stephen of being to blame for all of this, setting Jericho up to fail as Sorcerer Supreme. He attacked Doctor Strange, but was stopped by the Thing. Daniel chose to leave Luke's body and vanished, but vowed to return and take revenge against Stephen and the Avengers. It should be noted Jericho's sacrifice did not go unnoticed even among the public, and it proved influential in getting them to forgive and warm up to the Avengers after the incident with Norman Osborn, though the Earth was left more exposed to magical threats than ever before, pushing Doctor Strange to work a little more closely with the Avengers following Jericho's death. Months later, Damon Hellstrom was attacked by an associate of the Avengers, Veronica Hand. Hand, a normal human without powers, had been previously working for Norman Osborn, was suddenly possessed and equipped with a magical lance she used to kill mages all over the Earth, such as a sorceress named Jennifer Kale. Veronica returned to the Avengers Mansion, their headquarters, where she was confronted by the FBI and S.H.I.E.L.D. over her recent actions. When they tried to question the woman, she collapsed. Ms. Marvel carried Veronica Hand into the mansion, only for her to become possessed in the process. Doctor Strange contacted Veronica on the astral plane to discuss the matter, while the others waited, nearly leading to a conflict with the FBI, who weren't willing to leave the Avengers to investigate this on their own. The being then possessed the head of the FBI on the scene, and forced the man to shoot himself in the head. It was at this point Stephen discovered the culprit was Daniel Drumm, back for revenge. Though Stephen tried to talk him down, Daniel was intent on revenge and killed Veronica right in front of Doctor Strange. Stephen fled the Avengers, realizing he could trust none of them, and discovered the body of Damon Hellstrom. Now considered a fugitive by S.H.I.E.L.D., Maria Hill insisted on arresting Stephen Strange, even after he tried to explain the nature of Daniel Drumm and their situation. As a result, Daniel was able to possess one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and shoot Maria, though luckily it was only a life model decoy, a robotic placeholder used by S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to avoid situations just like this. Drumm, having killed several people by now, returned to Avengers Mansion, where he was easily able to cause more chaos within the team, forcing them to fight one another. Amidst all of this, now unraveling on the front lawn of the Avengers headquarters and live on national television, Doctor Strange appeared on the scene and challenged Daniel to a duel in an attempt to bring this insanity to an end. Revealing he had expanded his abilities such that he could possess the entire roster of Avengers all at once, Daniel turned them all on Stephen Strange, agreeing to this duel on unfair terms. Doctor Strange was forced to defeat the Avengers one by one, ensuring he did no permanent harm to any of them, but proving victorious time and time again. Eventually, however, the combined might of Thor, the Thing, and Ms. Marvel proved too much for Doctor Strange, and Daniel had Stephen nearly finished. The Vision, immune to Daniel's possession, was able to turn the tide, and Doctor Strange was able to procure a series of spells, including some dark magic, that was able to destroy the spirit of Daniel Drumm completely. As a result, from the afterlife, at the prompting of new arrival Damon Hellstrom, the real Ancient One appeared before Stephen Strange, restoring the man's status as Sorcerer Supreme, and even returning to him the Eye of Agamotto. With the day saved and things returned to normal, a memorial was erected for Veronica Hand, and the matter of Jericho Drumm was thought to have been brought to a permanent, but rather tragic end.